to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today we read from 1 Chronicles chapter 13. And David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, with every leader. And David said to all the assembly of Israel, If it seems good to you and from Yahweh our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as to the priests and Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. Then let us bring again the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. All the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. So David assembled all Israel from the Nile of Egypt to Lebo-Hamath, to bring the ark of God from Kiriath-Jearim. And David and all of Israel went up to Bela, that is, to Kiriath-Jearim, that belongs to Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of Yahweh, who sits enthroned above the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart from the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ahio were driving the cart. And David and all Israel were celebrating before God with all their might, with song and lyres and harps and tambourines and cymbals and trumpets. And when they came to the threshing floor of Kedon, Uzzah put out his hand to take hold of the ark, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Uzzah, and he struck him down, because he put out his hand to the ark, and he died there before God. And David was angry because Yahweh had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of God that day, and he said, How can I bring the ark of God home to me? So David did not take the ark home into the city of David, but took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of God remained with the household of Obed-Edom in his house 3 months. And Yahweh blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that he had. This is the word of the Lord. The trouble in the text is going to be a lack of consulting God, as we'll see here. What's David do? He consults the men, the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, so he doesn't talk to every single one of that 340,000 strong procession we talked about yesterday, but he talks to the leaders of the group, and then he does speak to the congregation, the assembly. If it seems good to you, and from Yahweh, our God, let us send abroad to our brothers. Let us bring again the ark of God to us. So the point here is moving the ark. And the question is, what is the ark? Well, verse 6 is what's going to tell you that. Yahweh sits enthroned above the cherubim. Enthroned. Yahweh enthroned. The ark is a throne. And you get this out of Exodus as they're talking about the design of the ark and how it's to be built. The cover, the lid of this box is called the mercy seat. It's a seat. Someone's supposed to sit on it. It's a throne, which the intriguing thing, I think, is the pictures that you see, since we're already talking about the cherubim here in verse 6. Cherubim are a kind of angel, and we don't know necessarily today what makes all the different types of angels distinct from each other. We don't even know how many types of angels there are. But the cherubim were to be made, and they were to be attached to the ark. And most pictures have the cherubim's wings touching, like folded forward and touching over the ark, which would make it so that it's no longer a seat. Rather than having the cherubim stretched out in such a way that they would either provide shade because they're giant, or even be like armrests for the one who would sit on the throne. Again, it's just an intriguing thing to think about because we don't know exactly how the cherubim were laid out over the top of the ark. Moses did. God showed him. God detailed it clearly, and Moses gave it to Bezalel and Oholiab to finish the job that the Lord has given. Anyway, if it seems good to you, and if it seems like it's from Yahweh. Notice that. Notice the distinction there. How could they know if something was from Yahweh or not at this point in history? What should they have done? Well, David should have consulted with the high priest. Whoever the high priest was, does he even know at this point? He ought to have been looking to the high priest to figure that out. And then the high priest himself would have been able to use the Urim and the Thummim, the two stones that the high priest has in the ephod, the breastplate, for casting lots to determine the will of the Lord, and that the Lord would guide the rocks, the stones, the casting of lots to determine the answer. There's no inquiring of the Lord being done in the text. Not at all. Not here at the start, not at the end as we move forward. Again, that's what's missing. And we see that even at the end. The assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. What about Yahweh? Was the thing right in the eyes of Yahweh? So they're going to bring the ark. And in order to bring the ark, they're going to do so with another procession. So they had the procession that has brought David to the city of David, Jerusalem. Now they're going to have a procession, including the priests and the Levites, from all the people scattered abroad. And they're going to gather them, and they're going to parade the ark from Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem. Now, that's not a far trip. I mean, it's a 5-mile journey. So I guess for a parade, that's a decent trek. But Kiriath Jearim's situated roughly 5 miles to the west of the city of Jerusalem. Verse 5, so David assembles all of Israel from the Nile of Egypt to Lebo-Hamath to bring the ark of God from Kiriath Jearim. Several notes on this. First, typically, if you're assembling all of Israel, the idea is that they are from Dan to Beersheba, Dan being the northernmost city, Beersheba being the southernmost city. This goes beyond that. The Nile, down in Egypt, far more south and southwest, I guess you'd say, and Lebo-Hamath, which is far to the north. So if you look at Israel, Israel really doesn't extend much beyond the Sea of Kinnereth on the north side, or the Sea of Galilee, New Testament era. Damascus is a helpful city to mark, as it's commonly found on maps. It's about 45 miles northeast of the Sea of Kinnereth. Lebo-Hamath is another 30 miles north of Damascus. So this is far beyond the northern border, far beyond the southern border. Wherever our brothers, wherever the Jews have been scattered, bring them. I said Jew. They're not called Jews yet at this point. Wherever the Israelites have been scattered, bring them. Let's process the ark to Jerusalem. Now, why is the ark in Kiriath Jearim in the first place? When Israel settles in the Promised Land, the ark moves a couple of times. Eventually, it's going to end up settling in the city of Shiloh. And it remains there for, I believe it's like 300 years. And eventually the Israelites decide, as they go to battle against the Philistines, that they're going to take the ark of God before them into battle. And again, consulting Yahweh or not, I'm not really sure on that text. That's 1 Samuel chapter 4. And as they go out into battle, they lose, and the Philistines capture the ark. The intriguing thing about that whole section is that the Philistines, having captured the ark, the Lord messes with them, like he judges them wherever the ark goes. They notice that things are going poorly, and so they eventually tire of the ark, and they send it back. Like, they actually give it back to Israel because they don't want this thing anymore. The ark is the presence of God, and it's going to be important when we get to Uzzah here in just a little bit. So they send the ark back, but the ark never makes it really back to the tabernacle. It ends up in Kiriath Jearim in 1 Samuel chapter 7, at which point we read that it stayed there for some 20 years, and all of Israel lamented that, which picks up on verse 3 of our text today, that they did not seek the ark in the days of Saul, which means they did not seek God's presence, they did not seek the Lord's direction or purpose, and they really haven't started doing that yet here either. So they're taking it from Kiriath Jearim to Judah, and they carry the ark not the way the Old Testament described it to be carried. The ark has, I guess, gold rings on its corners that 2 poles are supposed to be positioned through, and those poles actually are never supposed to be removed. Apparently they have been. Those are gone. And instead of using the poles to carry them, they use a cart. And Abinadab, whose home the ark has been resting at, his 2 sons are going to be the ones driving the cart. So you might imagine a wooden cart, for example, that has someone pulling it, somebody pushing it, or something of the kind. The boys are doing the work. The sons are doing the work here. But they're not carrying it by poles, which makes a big difference. You hit a bump in the road with your cart, ark topples, and that's what happened. That's what we're going to see happen. That doesn't happen if it's being carried by a couple of men, 2 or 4 men, holding on to these poles over their shoulders. And you put 4 men, 6 men on those poles, even if one of them stumbles and trips, the rest of them can still support the load. The guy just, gets up, brushes himself off, grabs hold, keeps moving. It's not what they do. That's going to come back. And it's going to harm, especially Uzzah, but also David and what he sees. So they're driving the cart, they're celebrating, rejoicing with all their might. So a loud and boisterous celebration, which they continue to do later on when it finally does make it to Jerusalem. And Michal, one of the wives of David, gets quite upset about that. They celebrate with all kinds of musical instruments. But when they're not even there yet, they're at the threshing floor of Kedon, who's also known as Nakan, in 2 Samuel chapter 6's account of this. Again, the oxen stumble. And the cart slips, tips, however that may go. The ark's falling. And Uzzah, in a move that he believes is respectful to God, not wanting the throne of God to hit the ground, Uzzah stretches out his hand to catch it, to secure it, so that it doesn't fall. But what's the problem? And this is what you can ask your kids. Why does God get angry and strike Uzzah down? See if they know. The picture here is of holiness. That once the ark was made, once it was commissioned, once it was consecrated, was the Old Testament word, anointed, no man was to touch that thing again. It was holy. It was set apart to the Lord only. The ark would be stored in the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies. Eventually it'll go into the temple once Solomon builds that. And only one man would go into that room before the ark, and he only went in once a year. That's the chief priest on the Day of Atonement, the 7th month of the year. I believe that's the 10th day of the month. He would go in, and he would go in with sacrifices. The blood of the sacrifices for himself and for the people, and he would sprinkle the blood on the ark and before the ark, but he wouldn't even touch it. Not even the high priest would touch it. No one. Again, all of this is avoided if they had carried it the way the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, had given Israel to carry it. But as they have not been consulting the Lord in this, they have not consulted his word in this either. They have ignored the Torah, or the Pentateuch, the books of Moses. And so Uzzah is struck down because as a sinner, he could not come into contact with the holiness of God. And again, it's God's throne. God is in the midst of his people, wherever this ark is. Which is why when the Philistines captured it, it was bringing them harm, because God was still present with his ark. And it's why, as we see here at the end of the text, when it goes to the house of Obed-Edom, his house is blessed. All that he has is blessed, because Yahweh is present. But Uzzah feels the wrath. David is angry about that, doesn't understand this himself yet at this point, it would appear, and they call the place Perez Uzzah. Perez, a Hebrew word for to make a breach or to break out. So the Lord has broke out against Uzzah, and David is afraid of God, which is a rightful thing to fear the Lord. However, it leads him to say he cannot bring the ark back to Jerusalem. Maybe ask the children there, why not? Why didn't he bring it to Jerusalem like he was originally planning to do? So instead, they break off, and they go to a nearby man, Obed-Edom, and they leave the ark with him. And he's going to take care of it for the next 3 months. And again, he is blessed in all that he does. So David's fear overtakes him. They have not consulted God in any of these things. God is present. Really, all they had to do was ask. But again, the high priest, casting of lots, those would have been proper ways. But even if David had prayed, would have been a starting point. We see none of those things. Not in this text.